The Valley Current.
I'm jealous of you guys that you got into Stanford. So we're going to do a little prize thing at the end, but it requires you to actually be able to swear that you're going to focus on this discussion, because we're going to try to create what Wally was working on and never really published, Dr. Bortz, which is what happens in an actual room, not Zoom, in an actual room, when you create a metabolic field. There's actually a metabolic field in formation in this room. We are sharing molecules and impacting our metabolism. He was working on this and thought of it as almost like a force, the equivalent of gravity. And I would say to him often, because he was my next door neighbor and we would visit often, after his wife died in particular, and he lived alone, on his own, from about 85 until his death. He died in his home in Portola Valley. He was my next door neighbor. And he said, I've got to write this paper. And I said, just start dictating words. Hire a secretary, get a research associate. I made a whole bit, in fact, I even offered to pay for it because he was so frugal. I mean, he died very wealthy, but he was so frugal about spending money. And I said, this paper is so important. So part of my dedication for the next less than an hour is to him, and one of you may be picking up on this concept of a metabolic field, which actually requires everyone to sort of stay away from their screens. And I know people are going to type and take notes and so on, but literally the way to create a metabolic field, and this becomes important for some of what I'm about to say, is that you have to actually focus attention on the other folks in the field. So, for example, I'm going to start with sort of, well, the equipment's working now. Murphy may suggest, no, the equipment's not really working. I'm going to do like a little thing that starts kind of the prize thing. And I just want the first person to shout out, if they can, who is this person? Sam Bankman-Fried. What happened to him?
Went to jail.
Went to jail for what?
For fraud.
For fraud. Federal crime. One of the youngest cryptocurrency billionaires. So it's obviously not about money. Like lifestyle is not about money. So then we'll go to the next one. Oops, wrong direction. Who's she? Someone else. Anyone else?
Holmes.
Right, Elizabeth Holmes. What happened to her?
Jail.
Went to jail for what? Federal crime of fraud involving investor fraud. Both of them were some of the youngest billionaires, and Sam Bankman-Fried had two law professor parents. All right, number 3. Who's that? Gets harder, doesn't it? You know? Anyone know?
Jeffrey.
Who?
Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein. What happened to him? Went to jail. I mean, this is sort of a theme here. For what? I know the news kind of evaporates over time. What did he go to jail for? Anyone?
Human trafficking.
Human trafficking on what? His own private island, right? He had an actual private island, a billionaire. What happened in jail to him? Murdered. Some people think what? Committed suicide. Of course, this is not working because I have a password on here. Hold on a second. You have to get the Face ID right, high security. All right, now it gets harder. It gets harder and harder. Whoops, let's go a little easier than that. Who's that? Martha Stewart, right? What happened to her? Went to jail. Why? No, why? Second chance.
Insider trading?
No, wrong. She got acquitted of that. What did she go to jail for? This stumps everyone. She obstructed justice by not answering questions honestly when the FBI interrogated her. Now you could say maybe she had a bad lawyer, the lawyer should have handled it better. But I mean, this gets harder and harder. I mean, you see the theme, right? Who's that? Anyone know that person? Another billionaire. By the way, these are all billionaires. This gets harder, right? Who is it? Anyone know? Huh? No, it's not. It's not Madoff, but it could be. It's Taubman. Taubman owned Sotheby's and did price fixing and went to jail for price fixing, another billionaire, and he owned a lot of real estate. He had a big real estate company. So you get the flavor of this. I actually had 7 of them intentionally. Let's see if I can get up the next one. Who's this? This gets harder. This is harder, right? Another billionaire that went to jail. Maybe we'll stop this because obviously I'm stumping. I mean, this is interesting, but basically this is Alan Stanford, another guy that had a private island, another guy that was engaged in fraud, another guy that was ultimately arrested and convicted. And I'm not sure what happened to him. I think he died in jail. I haven't looked that up. But then the last one, which was kind of funny, and even I didn't know this. Does anyone know what happened to this guy? He had a cryptocurrency exchange. It kind of relates to the first one that we put up. But this guy did the cryptocurrency exchange in Turkey. No one's going to get this right. And he got 11,991 year sentence. It's called, in Turkey, I guess they have to put it in years. That's the way they do things. And his name is Therese. And I just do this to kind of give you the flavor of, you can engage in a lifestyle that ends up putting you in jail. And it's not because you need more money. It's not because you need to accumulate more money. You have more money, but you would decide to engage in a lifestyle where money is probably the highest priority. Although you could look back and say not all those people were all about money. In fact, Sam Bankman-Fried would attest that he was about what's called effective altruism, which is accumulating money for the purpose of actually doing good deeds. Now, the prosecutor took advantage of that and said, hey, that's not really what's going on. This is really all about money. So now we'll get to the main part of the discussion here and what I want to do as we go along. So maybe now, hold on a second, let's see if I can, yeah, so I want to also dedicate this to Leonard Hayflick, Dr. Leonard Hayflick. Does anyone know who Leonard Hayflick is? Anyone? No? Dr. Leonard Hayflick is the gentleman that discovered the Hayflick limit. He probably should actually have gotten the Nobel Prize. He ended up in litigation. He didn't go to jail. He's an honest guy. But he ended up in litigation with the federal government over who owned the cell cultures that he was working with, where he proved, or at least to date it hasn't been disproved, that cells have a limit to how long they can live. That's called the Hayflick limit. And the limit is somewhere between 40 and 70 cell divisions. And if you go through and look at the literature on it, there's a point at which cell life just inevitably hits the death cycle going down this curve. And he discovered that. He lived to 93. He was a good friend. We did a number of podcasts together. He lived alone as well. His wife, I think, also died at about 85. He was good friends with Dr. Walter Bortz. And Dr. Hayflick lived on his own through COVID. Everything was fine. Everything was great. Then he went to his doctor for his annual. Now, I have to tell you, I'm convinced, having talked to him, that once you get into your 90s, do not go in for your annual physical. You're only going to get bad news. You're not going to get good news. You have to actually treat your own self-regulation as most important. He got some news that said, it doesn't look good for you. We see a number of things on the scans, His mindset totally changed. His mindset, even on the podcasts that we did, which were generally very upbeat. If you look, I think I've got, here's an example of a podcast where we would do a topic like why smart folks get the science of the Hayflick limit so wrong. That's available on Apple Podcasts and all the other players. We have something called the Valley Current at the firm. It's a pro bono thing. We don't do any advertising. We try to interview really smart people about what is it that actually motivates them to continue to extend their human potential. And that was happening both for Wally on this metabolic field idea, and it was happening for Hayflick on what is the actual, what he called the etiology of death. What events actually happen as everything starts to shut down? What are the actual triggers that play that shutdown? What plays out over time? So he was working on a paper and maybe a book on that. None of that is preserved, to the best of my knowledge. When I talk to his family, like, his papers are all over the place, and no one's gone through and backed up his computer. So hopefully, in the next 30 or 40 minutes, some light bulbs will go off. They've gone off for me in connecting with these people over time. And you'll actually get to the point of saying, oh, yeah, there is something to this. And really, it all does start with Dr. Walter Bortz and the luck I had in becoming his next door neighbor, because he lived in Portola Valley for many years. We bought a place, this was 1993 in Portola Valley. And we were lucky enough to have him as a next door neighbor, and I started to spend time with him, and he was then working on this book, Dare to Be 100, in which he said that Leonard is correct, that probably the natural fullest potential you can get to is maybe 125, based on this notion of a Hayflick limit. Now, there are some people that are doing some wacky stuff to try to extend it. They, there's some stuff, I'm sure you could say, this guy Johnson is doing all sorts of stuff. You can watch his stuff on YouTube. But he said, look, we should aspire to something called a healthy 100 years. And one of the initiatives we started that supported lifestyle medicine in this class was this initiative we call HHY, which is Healthy 100 Years. How do you actually imagine getting to healthy 100 years? What do you have to do? So the light bulb goes off that, look, once you posit a number like 100 years, you can do the math and say, well, how many hours is that? Now, most people don't do that. Most people don't have some sort of clock that's working backwards saying, how many hours do I have left? Now, this doesn't sound like a lot of hours, right? To me, it doesn't sound like a lot of hours to say, basically, it's less than 1 million hours. That's not a lot of hours. To a lawyer, it's not a lot of hours. You can laugh about that, but it's true, right? We don't have this. We don't have this clock going backwards. We generally charge by the hour. Most people get an hourly rate. If you're a contractor, you get an hourly rate. Sometimes if you're an employee, you get an hourly rate. There's a minimum wage that sets an hourly rate. And in general, when I think back at this, I was not thinking when I was a kid. That's my picture from when I first got into law school, moved to UCLA, moved to Los Angeles, had that full head of hair. I'll take off my hat now. You'll see, it all goes away over time. You have to accept this. And then I was this super athletic jock at UCLA, opening my first bank account. Back then, it was not an ATM card. It was literally a plastic card that had your social security number, I think, on the back. Oh, it's blanked out. All right, it was on there at one point. And I have a very formal name, Giacomo Russo. So my thoughts all leverage off of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So I'm going to get rid of this and turn this on. It works. It's fine. Okay, great. So Maslow hierarchy needs is all about the 1950s and what are the basic things we need. My thesis is it's all provided for. We have our physiological needs provided for. You can get a free lunch almost anywhere. Seriously, not just here. Our safety needs are mostly met most of the time, not all the time. Obviously, it depends on whether you take a subway or whether you take some form of dangerous transportation. In general, I'd say the needs we don't necessarily get are the top, the self-fulfillment needs, right? So we should spend more time talking about what happens over this magical 1 million hours where we can actually get to a form of self-actualization. Did Wally get there? I think he did get there, but he would say if he was here, he didn't, because he never actually got to the point of presenting the paper about this theory of a metabolic field. I think he would regret that he didn't hire the research help to build that paper and to present that paper. And I think the same is true for Leonard Hayflick. Really a high potential guy, worked right to the end, right to the very end, he was writing stuff. And he would say, I think, the same thing. So if you divide one HHY, one healthy 100 years, which hopefully we all aspire to, although we're gonna do the data, we're gonna look at the data right now, which is we ask people, does this work? I have to change the channel, hold on a second. Lectern computer. We actually had 3 devices to work at the same time here. So we asked people, what's your current chronological age? Most of you are 18 to 24, a few of you are a little older, and we have some older folks in here too. We have somebody that's over 65. Then we go this way. 22, we just compared, we did the same survey with the 2022 class. Sort of a similar group. We asked, what do you think is your current biological age? And 72% said more or less the same thing. Biological age is tracking chronological age. So no one felt a lot older, no one felt a lot younger. I think that was true throughout this data. Unfortunately, I don't think we did that question in 2022. How many hours of sleep per night do you average? 7 to 8 was mostly, some people 6 to 7, and a bunch of people were 8+ hours. 8+ hours is really what you should get, right? That's what most of the data suggests. You should get 8+ hours. As you get older, you have a harder time sleeping. That's what I've discovered. Now, maybe some people say, no, it's the opposite. How many hours of exercise per week do you typically get? 47% said less than 1 hour, 16% said 4 to 5 hours, and then it's a small number in between, but less than 1 hour per week of exercise. That's a tiny number. I've discovered as I've gotten older that I only feel good if I get 3 hours a day. 3 hours a day, what is that? 3 hours a day is you ride a bike for an hour to the yoga studio, you sweat for an hour in the yoga studio, and then you ride an hour bike ride back. It's 3 hours. And then you have a voracious lunch, which probably if I didn't have the lunch, I could cut down the amount of exercise. So then how much total lifespan do you believe you personally can live? 52% said 90 to 100 years. Compare 2022, 31%. That's a big difference. The numbers are different. There are people that basically are now remember, 2022 is COVID. COVID-19 is in play, in full swing in 2022, particularly in California. We have offices in Florida and New York. It was less so in Florida and New York. People were working in 2022, even in an office in Florida and New York. In California, offices were closed. How much total health span in years do you believe you personally can live? And people are like pretty optimistic, 80 to 90 years, which is kind of sort of a recognition that the last 10 years won't be so great, right? For those that think they can live 90 to 100, but their health span will start to decline somewhere as they approach 90. Although there are a few people, 16%, that said that they thought they could get to 90 to 100 years, and a few that, one person maybe that said over 100. And 2022, the data was, I think, less, 19%. Well, there actually were a couple people saying over 100%, so maybe it's similar. How much total work span in years do you expect? 33% were 60 to 70 years, 22% 50 to 60 years. There's an argument that AI is going to reduce all these numbers. There's an argument that people are going to work far less with the power of AI. There's an argument. There are some people that say we're going to have a leisure economy, maybe within the next 10 years, maybe literally within the next 10 years. And the 2022 data, it was different. 70 to 80, 60, 70. The numbers were smaller, right? Brain span during your lifespan, 80, 90 years was the highest. Some were more optimistic, 90 to 100 years. And then how many hours per week do you expect to work in a full-time position? 30 to 40 for most people, others 40 to 50, some 50 to 60, and then there were a few that said 10 to 20, right? And I think the 2022 data was actually less. No, maybe it was similar. How much in gross income do you expect to earn per year in full-time work? The data was spread all over the lot. Some people were 300,000 plus, some people were like, no, it's much smaller. 2022 data, I think, was higher generally. And then there's just two more of these. Given your anticipated work span, health span, and lifespan, how much do you anticipate to need to retire comfortably? And the data suggested that most people, if you take the sort of numbers that are up there, it's sort of north of a couple of $1 million, right? Basically, if you add up the numbers that are there across the board, 22% said 3 million to 4 million. Some were blue, 4 million to 5 million. There's suggestion that inflation is going to make all these numbers get a lot higher, which is why some people putting their money in cryptocurrency, because their belief is cryptocurrency is kind of inflation-proof. And there is some argument for that. I think the data here was similar. I mean, the data was people had sort of big numbers. Some people even suggested over 10 million. So I'm going to also recommend some books along the way, hopefully. As we go forward, I'm going to recommend some books. One of them I recommend is Meditations for Mortals by a guy named Oliver Berkman. He really talks about how we all have to stop beating ourselves up about making money and using our time to make money, as opposed to using our time for other things. And then the question is, what are the other things that we use our time for? And the other book, and there'll be 7 books, I have a theory that everything kind of breaks down to groups of 7. I'll explain why in a few minutes. But it's way easier to remember a lot of things if you limit the focus to just a count of 7. There's actually some statistical proof of this. Phone numbers are 7 numbers, except for the area code. But the area code used to be kind of a common thing for a geographic area. Like it used to be here, 415, then they changed it to 650, then they changed it to, well, some is 408. Like the numbers change as we run out of numbers. It used to be, when I lived in Manhattan, it used to be 212. You can't even get a 212 number anymore. They're out of numbers. If you go in saying, I'll pay for a 212 number, I moved to New York, I want a 212 number, that's the classic number. You can't get that number. So then the second one is a Stanford grad, very well done, although very long. And the real personal anecdotes don't come out until about page 675. So you really have to spend time reading the whole book if you want to get to know Peter Attia. Peter Attia has a free blog and a free podcast. He also has a paid service. He's still a practicing doctor. Does anyone want to guess what the annual fee is to Dr. Peter Attia's personalized concierge medicine? Anyone want to guess what the yearly fee is?
$250.
Well, that's high, but $90,000 a year. $90,000 a year gets you 9 visits at $10,000 a pop, but you have to pay the 90. Whether you go 9 times or 10 times, whatever, it's capped. But basically, it's $90,000 minimum. But get this: to get into his concierge medicine with him, you have to have an Instagram following. Like literally, you have to be someone that's important enough to be handled by Peter Attia. So I always wondered, did Elon Musk move to Austin because Peter Attia moved to Austin, arguably to avoid all the additional California taxes that would be affected on his podcast? Because his podcast, he has a paid version of the podcast, a free version. There's a paid version that gets you his notes. Does anyone actually subscribe to Peter Attia, to the podcast? Anyone at all? You do? 2 people do? Okay, but you do the paid version? You don't do the paid version? You do the free version? You do the paid version?
No, free.
Paid version comes with the notes. It's like $120. It turns out he makes a small fortune on the paid version, including medical doctors who sign up to get the paid version because the notes are very detailed. And I did. Actually, and then you should know, if you can't get into the $90,000 a year version of his annualized personalized medicine, you can do the video version for $2,000 flat fee. I think he just raised it to $2,500. And then you get essentially a series of videos with follow-up recommendations, not an email or anything like that. So, you know, to me, reading the book and listening to the podcast is probably 90% of what you're going to get out of both of these much more expensive things. So now let me go back to the computer here. So who's this working? Hold on. There you go. So we know that a healthy 100 years looks like sleep and other and thinking. Thinking is really work, right? We're all knowledge professionals. Most of the time we spend should be in actually some form of deep thought or deeper thought. You are all in a knowledge economy. You are all thinking machines. A lot of what you do is think. Now the thinking turns into writing. The writing can be done by dictation, it can be done by typing, it can be done in a million different ways. But it turns out, and I'm going to posit this, we should be spending more time in the category called other. What's the category called other? Taking care of yourself. Taking care of yourself and taking care of those other people that are important around you. And that's actually what we're not doing, which is why we have a bit of a crisis. Now, the thinking can be broken down into many different categories: researching, reading, writing, revising, da-da-da-da-da. You know, you can do a lot of things. But fundamentally, the hours are limited, and the year is limited. And you're going to get a certain amount of time that you're going to be spending sleeping, and a certain amount of time you're going to be doing other things. So maybe there's like 40 plus years in that 100 years where you're actually doing what some people would say is thought leadership, which is each of you will have some specialty in your field if you get to carry out your God-given human potential. I know some people say, don't use the word God, and I'm not here to make a religious thing, but you've been given some human potential, you've been given some talent, you got into Stanford. That's like a major accomplishment. Presumably you haven't flunked out because you're here. I don't think anyone's just here for the free lunch. So you have a lot of talent, you have leadership potential, and my theory is that you can break this down to what I call the 7 essences. And I call the 7 essences because when my daughters were young, I said to them, one of the most important decisions you will make in your life is who you decide to partner with. We have a divorce crisis in America. In fact, a lot of people aren't even getting married anymore. That's some of the slides I think that you've seen in some of the earlier presentations. There was a presentation by an earlier gentleman that talked about how people are not even pairing up anymore. But a big event in many people's lives turns out to be getting married, and a bigger event turns out to be getting divorced. And the divorce numbers are skyrocketing. So I break them down to these 7 categories, and I said to them, if you can live a life where you can basically amplify your 7 essences and find someone who equally matches or exceeds your 7 essences, it's a hard thing to do, then you're on the right path. So HQ is all about health. That's what this course is about. HQ is health quotient. IQ is intelligence quotient. EQ is emotional intelligence. Most men you talk to. And then the last one is PQ, which is, does the person have a specific and significant goal or set of goals? These are quotients that I imagine someday people will put some metrics to. Now, health does have metrics. IQ obviously has an IQ test. People are working on an EQ test. I used to have in PQ this idea that it was really about sexual attraction. And then many people said, particularly women, said, no, it shouldn't be about that. But most men were like, no, that's really important. That's like the most important. And if I found someone that had those four essences, HQ, IQ, EQ, and PQ, and matched, I wouldn't care about the rest. But I think as you go on in life, you recognize the rest are pretty important. So I'll go through quickly what these are to expand on them, because I do think it's a way to think about how to imagine expanding your own human potential, which is it all starts with health. Because if you're not healthy, then you really can't engage in all these other activities. And that's what this course is about. And I put these S-word pairs, like sane and sober, this idea that you want to be both sane and sober, and by sober I mean no addiction. There's an argument that each of the 7 people that I showed you had a form of addiction to the accumulation of money or power, or both. Those 7 people that were convicted of various federal crimes and went to jail had some issue with their sobriety because they were addicted to the acts they engaged in designed to accumulate more wealth and more power. Like, you could even argue Epstein had a sexual addiction. I mean, you can go down any addiction, smoking, they're workaholics. I mean, it's not just like drugs or alcohol. And sanity really is about you really are able to sort of deal with the world, because the world's going to throw a lot at you. Now, we know from one of the previous speakers that only 2.7% of the adult population actually engages in various activities to maintain their health. That's a low number. And some of the data saying people are only exercising 1 hour a week, I think was the data in this class. That's a really low number. We also know that here, the 7 lifestyle pillars of this program are all about engaging in these 4 pillars, expressed in a different way. I'm saying something different. I'm saying, and this yoga part is also kind of interesting, and I'm not saying yoga, but I would suggest to you maybe thinking about how to think about these 7 essences as though they are part of what you do already, or you don't do it already. That is, you engage in activities designed to promote your health, you engage in activities designed to promote your intellect, IQ, HQ, IQ, and you probably do engage in activities to promote your EQ, which is, do you do the right thing? Like, what's coming up in 2 days? February 14th. Valentine's Day, right? Is that an important date anymore? I'm just curious. Is that actually an important date anymore? Raise your hands if you think that's an important date. Some people think it's an important date. It's actually a lower number of people. Like, I think it's an important date too. Now, a lot of people say, well, you shouldn't smoke, you should exercise. I mean, this guy smokes, drinks, and still enjoys life. He was America's oldest man. I think he has since died. He's a World War II veteran, 112 years old in a wheelchair. So maybe it's more about survival of the happiest rather than survival of the fittest. So a lot of this data is interesting. But I put to my kids, my 2 daughters, that EQ and HQ and all of these various Qs can be memorized or understood by pairing S words: sane and sober, sensitive and supportive for EQ. You want to be and you want to match with someone who's sensitive and supportive. And that means you don't put your head in the sand when someone needs help. You actually try to show some support. This was the data about meaningful connections. Does people remember this slide from one of the previous speakers? I got Michelle to send me all the speaker slides, and I went through them and said, these are some things that are worth repeating again. And I think at the end I have references to all these people. But I think emotions and health are related. And you really do want to take care of your EQ because it plays right into the other Qs. It plays right into HQ. It probably plays into IQ as well. So think of it as EQ either improves daily or not. And there is a suggestion that the more time we spend in front of a screen, EQ is going down. because the screen doesn't really talk back. The screen basically is your controls. You're capable of controlling the screen, so you don't have to deal with a human being. You don't have to look at a human being in the eye. Like these days, when we interview new employees, we note whether or not they actually look you in the eye. Why? Because when you're with a client, you actually have to make a connection. You have to have the ability to look them in the eye and to figure out if they're lying to you or not. Because that's what we have to deal with in the practice of law. There are many people, probably those 7 convicts that we previously put on the screen, who probably lied to their lawyer at the time that they were dealing with their case because they decided to go to trial and they lost. Whereas if the lawyer were told the truth, the lawyer probably would have negotiated a plea deal. Probably would have said, you're probably not going to win, and you're probably going to go to jail for a long time. Sam Bankman-Fried got a 25-year sentence. The word on the street is he could have gotten a 6-year plea deal, and he decided against it. So instead of putting in 6 years, he's going to put in like 4x that. And all of his various colleagues that all ratted on him, people would say in the scheme of things, they ratted on him or they squealed on him, they got very low sentences as a result of cooperating with the government. So leadership requires you these days to have EQ. And if you go to any of these AI classes, we support some of the AI work that's being done here at Stanford. Many of the classes are all about how to build AI that's emotionally friendly, how to build AI applications that people actually want to engage with. So that becomes an initiative, particularly in healthcare. So HQ plus EQ plus IQ together. So I think of this as smart and savvy. So who remembers now these S pairs? These S pairs become important for your own thinking about how do you promote your own set of quotients? How do you build on this? So smart and savvy is book smart, but what's like street smart? Street smart is harder in some ways because you have to traverse a world that's getting more and more complicated. What's the cheapest way? Who wants to offer up? What's the cheapest way to figure out what a flight from SFO to say JFK, the lowest priced flight, what's the cheapest way to get there? Who wants to suggest how you find that out? Anyone? How do you do it? You should probably have like an anonymous way to type in. Yeah, how do you do it?
Kayak.
Kayak. Anyone else want to offer? How do you do it? Yeah.
I think Google, if you just Google it, will like send you like what each different like route and airlines tickets are set up.
Right, Google has a service. The cheapest way is something called Skiplagged. Crazy name, stupid name, SKIPLAGGED.com. Why? Because if that flight is going on from JFK, say to Boston, if you get off that flight, meaning you can't check a bag, the Boston price might be lower. You can get the ticket as though it's SFO to Boston, and you can walk off the flight at JFK. You can't check a bag. It's called you're skipping the next leg or the next leg. Goofy name, but you're skipping it and you're taking advantage of the price discrimination that airlines computers calculate for the Boston market. There's examples of that on JetBlue, but if you go to skiplag.com and you type in wherever you're going, particularly if you're going like overseas, there'll be flights that like, I saw one at one point, it was kind of funny. It was a flight from SFO, I think, to London, and then it went on to Moscow. Like, no one's on that flight. It's even hard to get the visa rights to go to Moscow. And if you got that flight, this is a while ago, maybe before this Ukraine thing, the price was like half the price. So you could buy that flight, and then you can get off at London. So let's say it was $600 for the usual fare. It was like $300 if you booked it as though you were going to Moscow, and then get off the flight in London. You get what I'm saying? You can't carry on a lot of luggage. You gotta obviously, someone said to me recently, oh yeah, but you lose your airline points. The airline points are worthless compared to how much you save the money. They say, oh, you might lose the airline points for the flight. Like they might say, oh, you didn't take the whole flight. So they actually tried that case and lost. American Airlines sued Skiplag because they were taking advantage of their computers. I mean, this is like a thing people do. So then the fourth factor is purpose quotient, right? And I'd like to cite to a guy, Dr. John Gottman. Does anyone know Gottman.com? Gottman is like a very famous, actually started as kind of a math professor. He's a very famous statistician that completely changed and reinvented himself to become a social scientist studying couples. Male, female, 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 male, male, every type of couple, and he would videotape them and look at how they interacted. And he did a paper that said, I can predict with 96% certainty whether or not they're going to get divorced within the next 5 years. And he said it's all about the way they interact with each other for like 5 days, just 5 days of video. Imagine that you can go in, let's imagine we changed the world and said, to get a marriage license, you have to go into this place that has all these video cameras for 5 days as a couple. Can't get a marriage license without doing this. And then we analyze the videotape to see how you interact with each other. And your micro expressions to each other will tell us something about whether or not this is going to work. And you know, they actually would code the micro expressions. Today, they'd use AI, and they let AI go through and look at whether people grimace. Because it turns out we're not very good at reading even the closest relationships that we have with a significant other. Why? Because we're not actually looking at them in the eye and saying, you know, how important is this to you? Is this really important? I really don't want to do this, but if it's really important to you, I'll, you know, concede. And maybe down the road we'll do something that's more important to me than it is to you. It's like a whole give and take thing. My parents were married, by the way, right up to the end. They lived, my dad lived to 90, he died first. My mom lived to 93. She was younger. In fact, it's her birthday. Her birthday would happen soon.
On
right?
the 16th.
February 16th would have been my mom's 94th birthday. She died in 93. She stayed married for the full, whatever it was, 70, call it 70 years, a little more than 70 years. And they fought every day, and I watched that because I watched that. They had a grocery store in New York. I grew up in New York. I grew up starting work at age 6, packing bags and packing shelves and delivering, you know, goods. No elevators, 7 to 8 flights of stairs in Manhattan and, you know, Brooklyn, all over the place. And as a kid, I would watch them fight every day. I said, there's no way they're staying married. There's no way they stay married. But they stayed married. And I realized that Gottman principles apply to them. Even though they had this Italian culture of fighting, they looked each other in the eye and they stayed connected. They stayed connected. And I have to tell you, when I see clients, and I often see clients, and both men and women now, and there's a lot of wealth, and the hardest thing they go through these days is a divorce. And they say, that's it, it's game over. I said, it could be far worse. But they get divorced and then they lose all or half their assets, and they look at it and say, wow. So think of it as it's pretty important to study this stuff. And purpose, particularly if you're supporting your partner's purpose, is pretty important. So then if you add all these things together, and for a lot of people would stop here. A lot of people would say, that's enough. What with 7? Reduce it to 5. In fact, 3 is enough. You know, HQ, EQ, IQ, I'm fine. You know, just stop there. But I think you have to imagine that what you're supporting in yourself and your partner is this ability to engage in what we call flow. When does flow happen? When you focus in such an intense way that time passes so quickly. Like this hour is passing very quickly for me. Why? Because I'm sort of in flow. I enjoy this stuff, and you know what? You could hate it, and I'd still enjoy it. You could say this is all garbage, and I would still enjoy it. Why? Because I enjoy imagining that there's a future where one or several of you will pick up a small thread, just a little tiny thing that I said, and you'll do something that actually pushes your human potential, and you'll look back and say, there was a class I took at Stanford. It's weird. They had these medical doctors, they had these PhDs, and then this guy who's a lawyer shows up to talk about how he engages in flow by talking about really how he taught his daughters to make a better suggestion about how they would screen out men. Now, did they both succeed at that? No, but knock on wood, they're still happy. I mean, one of them ended up divorcing after, basically having a couple of kids with her husband. And the other one is like together with a guy with kids, but he doesn't want to get married. And she's okay with that. Like, okay, fine, that's not my tradition, it wouldn't be the Italian way of doing things, but we kind of accept that. So imagine that you're so self-motivated and so self-aware that you can put yourself into this flow state. There must be some of you that have been in this state before. There are people who say, oh, I get there by skiing. I moved up from green slopes to blue slopes to black diamond slopes, and man, when I take off down a black diamond slope, I'm flowing. There are other people that get there in other ways. But each of us probably have experienced this. And sometimes it's a conversation. Sometimes it happens actually with a significant other. And my thesis is, the more that you with a significant other get into flow together, and I think my parents were in flow when they fought each other. I'm now convinced that part of that fight was them engaging in flow activities together, and they were actualizing each other. So this notion of flow is you push yourself, and you get anxious about the challenge that's in front of you, and you push yourself and you get skill development. Your skills increase over time as you push yourself into anxiety. That's what people do when they go from green to blue to black slopes. They push themselves. That's what athletes do as well. They push themselves. So think of it as you want to push yourself to a point of mastery. And the more you push yourself to that point of mastery, the more it's likely you're going to get to flow, and the more likely it is that you're going to feel an enjoyment of life that really inspires you to get to the next level. So it's important to understand that. The last few things are what are sometimes I call freedom quotient, FQ. Some people call it financial quotient. My theory is the more you push yourself to build skill as a result of flow, the more likely it is that you will be successful on the financial side. Now, you can't push yourself too hard and push the envelope of legalities and ethics the way those 7 people did, because you don't want to end up in jail. But think of yourself as you're pushing your human potential, and that's the mindset that I want to leave you with, which is everything is about whether you have a growth mindset, as Carol Dweck would call it, a growth mindset, or a more limited mindset, where your beliefs are, I really can't do something. I'm really in a fixed mindset. I only can do a certain thing. My wife made a remark. We almost ran into some person, she's a PhD from Stanford. She's here at the front supporting me and videoing this. Dr. Lee Suter, she said, we almost ran into someone that was in the geology department. I won't name him. This guy could have been a full professor, but he never pushed himself. So I think you were saying he kind of limited himself to be like a lab tech or something. Like he limited himself. And he had all the capability to push himself, but he didn't push himself. And I think all of you have the capability. It is very much about the mindset that you bring to bear. And whether or not you buy into this view that as you get into this mode where you're more anxious, you're actually motivating rapid skill improvement over time. And that will end up leading to this final point, which is at the highest level, there's a CQ that I call a compassion quotient, where you're actually in a mode to give back to the world. You're in a mode to take everything that you learn and imagine giving back to this world in some way. And that becomes like soulful and spiritual, or soulful and sharing. So there's lots of ways to remember this stuff, but I'm just going to quickly say the theory I have is that you go through 4 years of college and maybe another couple of years of graduate school, and maybe another couple of years of professional school, or maybe an internship and a bunch of other stuff. And you should be always thinking about how do you grow your 7 essences, whatever your 7 essences are, whichever ones you think are most important, how do you grow those over time? So I'll stop here and take some questions. We have maybe a couple of minutes left. Part of what we do at the firm is very much have a discussion with startup groups about what they're doing to innovate. We will probably see some version of an iPhone, which is going to be even more distracting because you're going to wear it on your glasses. In fact, a lot of glasses these days, these glasses that I'm wearing right now, actually have a camera built in, so you can literally take a picture of a class, and unobtrusively, you can take a video in a class and it'll flash a light showing this. But think about it as, I don't have any sort of LCD on the other side of it, but think about it as the next step, it will have some LCD on the other side that has information. So anyone have a question about any of this stuff? Because I do think we're in a new world where very much we're going to see AI and computational power increase dramatically, and more information is going to cause more and more distraction, which will actually reduce the ability to have a face-to-face conversation that's non-distracting and that leads to a connection, which is a sad statement of the world if that's the way it stays. So I said we would raffle off, and we do have kind of a Coupa coupon for those. I mean, we have to figure out how to do this raffle, because at one point I said it should be about whoever did the survey. So maybe we should just raffle off 4 or 5 prizes.
Yeah.
How do we do it?
Actually ended at 120.
Oh, we ended up going over? Okay.
So I think we can.
So maybe we just have people do the raffle offline, and I'll leave you the gifts, and you can deliver the gifts, right? Those who stayed for the class, so I guess it's like those who stayed for the class and respond to the survey, you'll put your name in a hat, you'll figure out a way to do it, and then you'll pick out like 3 winners. And we have a Coupa coupon that's worth at least $25, maybe more. We have a Hard Rock Cafe shirt, t-shirt. And then we have, for those of you who want to learn how to play blackjack at a Hard Rock Cafe, we have the color-coded key for how you can best take advantage of card count and on a blackjack table at a casino. For those of you who want to play. Thank you very much. All right, take care.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.